Welcome to episode 70 of the It's Just a Hill Cycling Podcast. I am Jon, and I am here at NBX with Jason Behringer, JB. Now, JB, I asked you your official role at the shop. You kind of said like sort of general do-it-all. So, JB, you work the sales floor, you manage the website, you generally deal with my bullshit, amongst other things here at the shop, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on the show.
Also director of retail.
Director of sales?
No,
Director of rentals.
Rentals, sorry.
Right, rentals, right, which is, I guess, more popular, like in the sort of in the season. We're in sort of the what is it, the drolls of winter? Is that a term?
Yeah, usually starts up around end of May and then goes all the way to sort of October. We do rentals pretty much throughout that whole season.
Before we talk about your history with the shop, let's talk about your history in general with bikes.
Yeah.
You sent me a photo last night of you riding a bike at a young age, right? How old are you in that picture? 12 or 13?
Yeah, early middle school probably.
Okay, if it's cool with you, maybe I'll throw it up on the podcast.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Do you remember when you first learned how to ride a bike?
It's funny because I was thinking about this last night. I really started off riding, back in the day, big wheels was the big thing.
Okay,
So everybody had big wheels.
Yep.
And then eventually I started riding a BMX bike.
Yep.
And I got all my bikes from Casters.
Okay.
I remember going there with my father. It was sort of a big deal.
Yep.
You would get one on your birthday. Yep. You go in and you look and you pick it out. And it was
Casters was exciting as a kid. It was exciting for me too.
It was the big deal.
Yeah.
And so that bike that was in the photo must have been maybe my second or third bike I had, because the earlier bikes were all basically BMX, single speeds, sort of just go out, ride with the friends.
And what would you call this bike, the bike in the photo?
It actually had 5 speeds.
5 speeds.
It was right down at the neck, sort of with that long banana sort of style seat.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my first geared bike that I had, but I always preferred the BMX style.
And what were you doing at the time? Riding to school, riding around the neighborhood?
Yeah,
with friends?
I always had a real passion about just like riding my bike and getting out there and just seeing how far you could go and where you would end up for the day.
Yep.
So I would always ride my bike all through elementary school. I would ride my bike to school.
Yep. Cool.
And then once I got into middle school, around 6th grade, I always rode my bike to school. Yep. And then once I got to 7th, it wasn't so cool anymore.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And by that age, sort of 7th grade, I sort of phased out and started just walking.
Gotcha. Yeah. But you were living close enough to your schools that like you were able to walk or ride your bike or whatever.
Yeah. So I grew up in Wickford down on Main Street. Yeah. And basically I went to Wickford Elementary, Wickford Middle,
it's all
and
like
then
right
the high
there.
school. And it's literally like in a 2-mile radius kind of thing.
That's nice. I feel like that's sort of like small town riding your bike around. Like that's like kind of like quintessential Americana at the time. You know?
And down in Wickford, there was a core of 8 kids. Everybody had bikes.
Yeah.
We're doing the typical, find a piece of wood and try to jump over your friends.
Yeah, sure. Making little ramps or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Now you sort of let's just say you got too cool for bikes. Yeah. Right. Because that sort of happens. Yeah. Like your social circle, whatever it is. Right. I'm just going to walk to school now. Did the bike go in the back of the shed after that? And you never really looked at it?
Yeah, initially, early on in my life, I had a couple of bikes stolen right out of the back of the shed. That was very popular. Yeah. Kids were stealing other kids' bikes, even though mine were locked up. I think I had 3 or 4 bikes stolen.
Wow, really? When you were a kid, just out of the shed,
just
out of the
garage?
Shed.
Yep.
Damn.
It was pretty prone in Wickford for a while. And then, later on, I sort of just... by the time I got to high school, I wasn't riding.
You weren't riding, yeah.
And I would say 7th grade, 8th grade, I wasn't really riding. I was always walking and stuff like that. And then in high school, I sort of got into skateboarding. It was the big thing at the time in sort of the early 80s, mid 80s and stuff like that. Yep. And then in high school, I picked up surfing.
Oh, okay.
So I did a lot of surfing pretty much all through high school.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And so where would you go? What was the go-to spot around here? Because the surfing's big. I know nothing about surfing in this area.
So, there's, you got Narragansett. You got Monahan's Dock. Rincon is next to it. And then people go down to Point Judith Lighthouse.
Yeah, a little bit further down.
Off the lighthouse, there's another couple of other spots. Down at... Matunic, deep hole there. A lot of people would do sort of the Mexican pipeline, which is down in the Charlestown Beach area, because the way it sort of crashes on the beach and pitches out, it sort of has that resemblance of,
it's interesting.
That area.
The shore is so differently shaped here. You can be going northwest shore, or I'm sorry, north-south or east-west, right? So it's
and the surface underneath is very different. So the way a wave crashes on a sand base versus a rockier thing is completely different. Yeah. And I would never go over to Newport because back then it was very localism. So locals would stay local. And if you showed up in Newport,
you're kind of getting
you would get sort of get the attitude.
Now this is all summer activity, or were you someone that would surf in the winter too?
Went around.
Oh, cool. Do you do that anymore?
No, I actually don't. It's kind of one of those things where I'm kind of an all or nothing guy.
So you went in.
I went in head deep, did competitions, sort of got hooked up with a local shop. Oh, cool. Sort of got some minor sponsors and stuff like that. And then after high school, I actually went out and lived on Kauai and surfed.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So
how long were you there for?
About probably like 4 months or so. Basically went out there for the winter time. Prior to that, every summer I would go to a surf camp out in California.
Oh, cool.
The Pasquitz surf camp. And then a couple of times we just jump over the border and go down into Baja, Mexico.
So you were in like the San Diego area?
Yeah, San Clemente.
Oh, okay.
Is where the Pasquitz would have their camp at the time.
Yeah, cool.
So like Trestles is a very local San Clemente spot right up sort of the beach way. And then, I did Kauai for a while, and my plan was literally to ultimately live out there and stay out there. And I just opted not to. Came back from my sister's wedding and just never returned.
Never returned.
So we had the car. I just left it on the side of the road with the title signed and called it a day.
Wow.
Yeah, I went out there with a buddy, and he wasn't going to return, and then I had a choice to make.
Have you been back since?
No, I haven't. And that was pretty much one of the last times I ended up surfing. I still have the board and all that other stuff, but I gave a lot of the other stuff away and sort of put surfing aside. And
when did you get back into bikes?
It was around that same time.
When you're
So in 89, I graduated in 88. And so immediately after I graduated, I bought a bike from Casters again. I took out a loan. My parents said, if you want a really nice bike, you can take out a loan and start building some credit. So they co-signed a loan for me, and I ended up buying a stunt jumper comp. Which was at the time was a little over $1,000. So it was like big bucks then, all the componentry, high end. Still have that bike today.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I converted it into a single speed, of course.
Oh, cool.
But I still have the frame.
It's a steel frame?
Steel frame, and I could never just get rid of it.
Do you ride it?
No. Now it's sort of in componentry pieces, but for a period of time when I got back into cycling, I was riding it as a single speed bike.
And then what is the progression from there, right? So like you mentioned that it was a single speed. I know you now. I know that you like to ride single speed.
Yeah, so I took a huge hiatus from riding. I got married. I did a whole mess of other things and stuff. But ultimately what happened is in 91, I drove across country with my bike and sort of just decided I was going to drive across country and sort of just ride different spots.
Oh, cool.
At the time. And after I got back, I sort of got myself into a lot of other things. I'm a huge live music buff. So I used to follow a band around and do all that kind of stuff. And then I basically sort of never rode the bike again for literally, I don't know, well over 10 years. Kind of thing.
What type of riding were you doing when you drove around the country? Was it mountain biking?
Yeah, so I went out to Vail. I went out to Telluride.
And you would just spend a weekend or something?
Yeah, I just pull over. I had a van at the time, so I would just sort of camp out, the van life kind of thing. But this is back in 91. Kind of thing. And I just stay somewhere and just start riding. And sort of seeing the sights and seeing.
How were you figuring out where to stay? Obviously, like a pre-internet time, right? You couldn't just go online somewhere.
I had camping KOA book
Yeah.
that I would sort of just bust out the map and figure out where it was.
Yeah.
And if I couldn't find a spot, I would just find a place on the DL that looked okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places in Colorado I sort of just pulled over and just camped out.
Rode,
yeah,
slept.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was just more relaxed then. You didn't really get hassled a lot.
Yeah.
And then when I got back to Rhode Island, like I said, I sort of just stopped riding.
Yeah, new things came up. And
then once I got married in 2000, I basically sort of settled into married life, having a child, and
life happens.
Yeah. And the bike sort of went on the back burner.
Yeah. And then when did you get back in?
Yeah, so basically, living that sort of lifestyle, I sort of gained a lot of weight, of course. And I got to the point where my doctor was like, you got to change your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And at that point, I started sort of walking on the treadmill, trying to get more exercise into my life.
Yeah.
So in 2012, I started getting back into biking sort of seriously. And I realized that the passion I still had for it.
Yeah, you still liked it.
Yeah, it was one of those things that I never lost the passion for.
Sure.
And when I picked it up back again and I started riding again, I literally was just like, fell back absolutely in love with it.
Yeah.
I bought a mountain bike from a retailer up in sort of the Coventry way.
Yeah.
And I just realized how much I love being on the bike.
Yeah.
And I used to mountain bike pretty much just in Arcadia and stuff like that. And
Yep.
then after that, expand to like Big River and stuff like that. But I always went back to Arcadia. It was always my spot. That's where I sort of started riding. My very first race was out over at Pine Top in maybe 89 or 90.
Yep.
They had a race that started at the base of Old Pine Top, and you went up Pine Top's face and off the back, and then sort of into what would be Arcadia, and Stepping Stone Falls.
Who was running stuff like that? Like, who's organizing those?
I couldn't even
you don't
remember because a buddy of mine worked at Casters. He told me about it, and I just showed up.
It's all word of mouth.
Yeah,
it's all flyers or whatever.
Yep, and I just showed up kind of thing. So when I got that bike in 2012, I just sort of realized how much I sort of loved bicycling. I went into and started showing up for the Arcadia rides, which John Sumner and his wife were doing pretty much every Sunday mornings. And
mountain bike rides.
Right. And doing those consistently and just sort of being off the back and suffering terribly. Kind of thing.
Yeah. And what kind of bike is that? That's a mountain bike?
Yeah, so the very sort of, the bike I got into was a Scott scale bike, hardtail.
Like 3 rings in the front?
Yeah, it was 2 rings in the front.
2 rings,
And at the time it was good, cheap coil fork.
Yeah. This is 10 plus years ago, right? You said 2012.
And I rode that bike into the ground, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then I started doing some races on that bike.
Okay.
I think in 2012, I did the King of Burlingame.
Yeah.
And I always had a passion for sort of events and stuff like that, but not necessarily a competitive race per se. Like I'm more about sort of pushing myself, I think. Instead of being in
competition with others.
Right. Yeah. So it just... I mean, I like it, and I am somewhat competitive, but so I started doing King of Burlingame, the 6 hour at Burlingame. I did
that was the thing too?
Yeah, so I did that for 2 seasons. It was in like 2013 or 2014.
Yeah.
So I did those. And when I started, that was my first sort of longer ride. That was like 50 miles, 6 hours, see how many loops you can do around Burlingame.
Yeah.
And I realized I sort of like that sort of style of riding. Instead of just doing the short track.
Right. So you were into more of this endurance stuff.
Right.
Would you call that cross country?
No, it sort of blurs the line a bit. I think a lot has to do with where you're riding, but how many laps can you do in 6 hours?
Yeah, interesting.
And so I did that, realized I sort of liked that, and that sort of jumped me off into riding longer distance races.
Yeah.
And it was also around that time, I think, 2013, 2014, I got into single speeding.
Oh, okay.
So, but it was also around that time where I started doing the Vermont 50 every single year.
Yeah.
I was doing, later on, I was doing the New Hampshire 100, the Wilderness 101, which is down in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Wow.
Right outside of State College.
Yep. Now, are these like loops?
Yeah, so
like
the New Hampshire 100 initially, a long time ago, started out as one loop, which was 66 miles, and then they would tack on like another 34-mile loop extender.
Gotcha, yeah.
And then the Vermont 50 was one big loop. That's been going on forever.
Yeah.
So I did that, I don't know, like 7 or 8 times, a couple of times on the single speed. And then the Wilderness 101, that's a full 101 loop kind of thing. They did add a marathon one, which I did one time on the single speed, which turned out to be not a marathon. It was like 74 miles. They sort of botched up the loop. And you ended up doing a lot more than 100K.
Kind of on a
thing.
Single speed.
Yeah.
What draws you to single speed?
I think the simplicity of it. I started off using it as sort of a training mechanism. Just everything I read and everybody I talked to said basically you'll improve your bike handling and how you ride will really change.
Right.
Because you can't rely on gears or dumping gears to get yourself up something. Right. So in single speed, it's really about gaining momentum, keeping the momentum, and really like reading the trail and
the anticipation. Right. Yeah.
So what you think might be a smoother line might not be. It's actually like a false draw-in where the smoother line and quicker line, keeping the momentum, is going to be up over the rocks kind of thing.
Right. Because you want to get up and over as fast as possible.
Right. And you want to be as smooth as possible because then that just carries more momentum.
Right.
And I always joke, and I heard it from somebody, I don't even know when, every single speed comes with 3 gears, sit, stand, push.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? So at any given time, in any given ride or given race, you're going to be doing one of those things.
Yeah.
And for a single speeder, I always feel you fall into 2 classes. You're either a spinner, so you have you set
it up so that you can spin.
You can spin, use your cadence, right? And I was always the masher, so I prefer a slightly heavier gear. I prefer standing up, really mashing the pedals and getting down,
getting up and over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I used to always run around here like a 32-18 a lot of the time is sort of a divine gear, and then when I got older I moved to a 32-19. And I
like that when you get older it's like one extra
tooth.
It's like one extra tooth.
The funny thing is it makes a huge difference.
I'm sure.
It's just one of those things. But
you still ride single speed, right?
I do. I sort of prefer it over, or if I'm going to ride mountain bike, I prefer riding a single speed.
Yeah, you do.
I just went out a couple of last weekend, the weekend before, and I haven't been on the single speed bike, and I was sort of worried if I'd have the legs and how'd that go. And it's you don't sort of forget it. The legs aren't always there.
Right. But the way of thinking, it comes to you.
Yeah. So I did single speed for probably a 4-year block, really dedicated. That's all I rode all the time. And I started getting into some single speed pure races. Like there used to be a race out in Montgomery, New York called Single Speed-a-Palooza, which was sort of the gathering of the tribe. All the single speeders would come they would have sort of a New York class, a New Jersey sport class, and all these classes. So I did that for 3 years. First year I got deathly sick and I couldn't make the race the morning of. Second year, I ended up placing 3rd in my category in sport class for, I think I was in the New York one because they don't have a Rhode Island.
Sure.
And then the following year, I placed 2nd.
Oh, nice.
So, and then they canceled it. So I was sort of bummed because I was sort of shooting for
just
that.
not enough funding, hard to run events.
It's just Dark Horse Cycles used to sort of host it. It was a real cult-like following. Everybody would come up from everywhere and camp out at. It would be like coming to NBX and camping out here.
Yeah. Cool.
And all the people would come. It was at Stewart Forest up there.
Oh, okay.
Thing. Yeah. So.
And so you're into single speed for like 4 or so years. This is all mountain bike, right?
Yeah.
And now you never really moved away from single speed, but like
no, because then I basically during that same time frame I did like the Wilderness 101 on the single speed. That was pretty hard going. I did the Vermont 50 a couple of times on the single speed.
When does this journey go from flat bars to drop bars?
Yeah.
When does the hand position change?
So that went I was sort of getting burnt out, I think, on mountain biking. The baton on hosting the Arcadia Sunday ride got passed to me by John Sumner.
Yeah.
He was the president for NEMBA for a number of years.
Yeah.
He was looking to sort of stop hosting that every Sunday.
Yeah.
And I offered to do it, and he sort of passed the baton to me. I never sort of had the charisma as John.
Well, he's just like really...
He's a real friendly guy, outgoing, really encouraging. Was
he still involved in NEMBA at the point? Or was he taking a bigger step back?
He was taking a step back, I think. Yeah. And so at that time, that's just not my personality.
Yeah.
You can show up for my rides. I'll wait for you for a point.
I mean,
encouraging stuff. But if you're so far off the bat, I can't.
Yeah.
And so needless to say, when I took it over, I probably hosted it maybe for like a year and a half, almost 2 years. Yeah. And it never really sort of took off like how John was doing it. Yeah. I think out of all those people that showed up, the only one that stuck was JD. Yeah. Jason. So he was really, and that's how I met him. Yeah. And at that time, I started transitioning to what we would call gravel riding.
Okay.
At that time, kind of thing. So that was like 2015.
Yeah, so I would say that, so 2015 you get into gravel riding. I think that's how I met you, was gravel riding. Right? I mean, you're probably the person at the shop that I've ridden with the most, I would say. Okay. Yeah. Like, for sure, actually, hands down, person I've ridden with the most doing gravel rides. I know you organize a lot of gravel rides. You've done other events in the past, right? So there are other events that you're sort of spearheading in between this, what would you call it? The one that Sumner was doing? What was the name of that event?
It was like the Sunday morning Arcadia ride.
Sunday morning Arcadia ride. Yeah. And so you say that sort of like fizzles out, if you will, right? After a year and a half. Does anyone else take it on?
No, not really. At that time, it was sort of new regulations were coming in. And if you had over like 10 people in the group ride, DEM wanted a permit pulled and stuff like that. So it was always slightly, low key. Right. And at that time, I was also just sort of getting burnt out on mountain biking. Yeah. And I was sort of just looking for a change in surface, let's say. Yeah. And what initially triggered me to get into that was I started cyclocrossing. Oh, okay. So my very first gravel bike, because they didn't have gravel bikes at that time in 2015, I bought a Trek Crockett. Which is a cyclocross bike. Yeah. And in 2015, I started getting into cyclocross, but I also started riding the gravel roads around Arcadia. Gotcha. And at that time, I also then started looking for events to ride that bike. Gotcha. And so
specifically cross events.
No. So basically gravel events, just riding it on my cross bike, because that's what everybody was doing at the time. Right. So my first sort of gravel event that I did was Vomar. Okay.
You told me about this. Yeah. Is a precursor to Overland?
What happened is there was Vomar, so the Vermont Overland Maple Ride. Yes. And then there was VO, so that was the Vermont Overland. Yeah. So Vomar always happened the last weekend of March. Oh, okay. So a lot of people nowadays talk about, Raspatista. Oh, it's so hard. Well, if you did Vomar, man, you riding in like 4 feet of snow on these class 4 roads that they pack down with the overland trucks.
Right. And now, I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that like these cross bikes are not like gravel bikes today. What is the tire clearance on that bike?
Yeah, so mine at the 32? Time, normally is 32, but I was able to stuff 38s on there. Okay. And you couldn't get anything. And if you popped a spoke on that wheel, like it was sort of, could be pushing it or carrying it. Because it was going to clear the, the frame itself.
Tubes.
No, it was at that time. It was tubeless.
You were tubeless?
Yep.
Nice. So you were at the forefront of tubeless.
Yeah. So I just took that over from mountain biking. Gotcha. Like it was just at the time, it was sort of people were doing sort of like ghetto tubes, which is like taking and butterflying a tube and sort of making whatever you had. Yep. That wasn't a really tubeless rim into tubeless. Gotcha. Tubeless. Okay. So I was doing Vomar. I was doing the Overland. All that stuff was up in the Woodstock. Pomfret area.
Gotcha.
So it's always started at, well, initially Vomar Overland started in Woodstock itself, then moved up to Suicide 6 at the time.
Oh,
it was
okay.
called that.
How
ski
big
resort.
are these events at the time? Like participation?
Yeah, there was no lottery to get in, and you know,
It's not like you're waiting at your computer.
Yeah, no, you
January
could still
1st.
get in like the week of.
Yeah.
It was low key. It was
affordable.
And the other thing that really drew me to it is sort of like the community aspect of graveling.
Right. I mean, as corny as it is to say the spirit of gravel, it's a thing.
Yeah.
Or at least it's like...
It was.
It's approachable. It's chill.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think when people talked about the whole spirit of gravel, I understood what that meant. I don't know if I 100% always bought into it kind of thing, because I think it's very sort of trendy to say.
Well, it quickly turned into a marketing ploy more than anything.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, that ruins the spirit of anything.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So I was doing that. I was doing... basically Farmer's Daughter was coming up around.
Yeah, another great event that you told me about.
So I've done almost every iteration of Farmer's Daughter except for one. It's if you haven't done the event, it's
fantastic.
And I know you have.
Oh, I've done it. I plan to do it again this year.
It's one of those things I tell everybody. Are
you registered for this year?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I go out, I camp up the night before, hang out with everybody.
What are some other great gravel events? One that you mentioned to me was the Ranger. I have not done the Ranger.
The Ranger's another good one. So that was on my bucket list for quite a while.
Yep.
And I finally got around to doing it, and you definitely need to like the climb for sure.
Yeah.
Where it is in Vermont, it's sort of on the outskirts of White River Junction, sort of like a very small town. I forgot what the town's name was, but basically you sort of camp out in their fairground field.
Yeah.
And the only smooth track is cutting through a horse pasture, and then you instantly start climbing up.
Yeah.
And on that ride, you're either going up or you're going down.
What's the surface like? Similar to Overland?
It's and they use
Class 4 sections.
Class 4 sections, a couple of short pavement sections, but predominantly I would say like 80% sort of gravel.
Gotcha.
And there's some the back end. There's some hard climbing for sure.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And then they have a couple of different lengths sort of to do, and they have the main length I think is like 45 or something like that, and then they do a sort of a lollipop 10-mile one if you want to add on additional kind of thing.
Yeah. D2R2 you've done before.
Done that. Yep, I did that.
You probably told me about D2R2
yeah.
too. I feel like most of these gravel events, you were the one that told me about. Like, I remember going to one of the first like RI gravel rides that I want to say Noah was probably former guest of the podcast. Noah was like hosting on Strava, but you were very much a part of that.
Yeah.
You know, you were helping like figure out loops, and you were very welcoming, and like I was super new to gravel coming from the road side of things.
Yeah, because Noah was doing those GBRI gravel events.
Yeah, gravel bike for
mostly in Arcadia, I think, all the time.
Yep.
And it's funny because I tell people Rhode Island's got a lot of gravel. You just need to know where to look and how to link it up.
Right.
And usually when people come out for rides with me and they're surprised how much gravel we have here.
Yeah.
Especially if you link it up in a solid way. But yeah, I think that's where I met you.
Yeah, for sure.
On Noah's rides.
Yeah, yeah.
You and Brian and some of the other core guys from Just a Hill.
And so before that, right, you're sort of past the point where you're doing these Burlingame Sunday morning rides, but there are other events that you're spearheading, you're helping host, and we did sort of talk about how DEM wants a permit if there's more than 10 people.
Right.
But there's an event that I have been hearing about since before I was into bikes, because my dad used to do it, and it was an inspiration for me to want to do Sloppy Johns, but there was Greasy Joe's, and I think at a point, maybe allegedly or not, there was some involvement there.
Yeah, so how that came about was Greasy Joe's was a local gravel event that was put on and started by Next Racing.
Yeah.
And I knew a couple of those guys that were sort of into that. And eventually down the line, when a lot of them sort of dissipated, the one individual who was sort of the driving factor behind that, who I knew through cyclocross, basically asked me if I wanted to be sort of part of it and sort of help out every time the event sort of goes around. So that's how I got involved with sort of greasy Joes.
Yeah.
And it was always just one main loop, the classic loop.
Yeah.
Hard as hell. You're picking
Super
on a wet day.
Yeah.
And you could get out there, and it was 100% free. We would sort of do it on the down low, so to speak, and it was just a good time.
Oh, it was amazing.
It was a great ride. And then one year I added a longer route with the approval of, the main guy.
Yeah.
And I called that loop the Hellraiser. And people were like, oh, what's that? I got it from the movie in a sense.
Yeah, of course.
And basically did a play on, the
Cenobites.
The Cenobites.
A little bit of a torture chamber type of, right.
I always thought that kind of stuff, you put it out there and you make it really vague and mysterious and it gets people to come out. They're like, oh, what's this all about?
Yeah.
And those are the events I sort of like. You don't sort of really know what you're in for until you're in it.
Yeah, and there's also, I think there's some sort of a camaraderie with a lot of us in like the suffering.
Yeah.
Right? It is that very much, it's that type 2 fun type of thing that like you might not be having the most fun while you're doing it.
Right.
But you look back on it, you're back at the parking lot, you're back at a coffee shop or something, and you're like, oh my God, that climb, or like, I can't believe. And as much as it was sort of sadistic in a way, it also was, I think, a super welcoming event. And like you were out there in the woods, like with snacks.
Yeah.
And I like that was great to like, I will never forget coming up the section that I hate so much, Old Voluntown Road, and going maybe like what I would call maybe the easier way, which is up because I don't really care to go down it that much.
Yeah.
But I remember I specifically was like trying to get through it as quick as possible and coming around a corner and seeing you there, just like in the woods, like with your Subaru and a bunch of like great snacks. And like that was a lot of fun. And it was a big reason why I wanted to do like a free event that is just like fun, is a community building, not to like pat ourselves in the back too much, right? Because we're enjoying it too.
Right.
Like I liked to do it.
Right.
I like to see people show up. I like to meet new people. I like to see them suffer in a way, but like to share in that misery, to share in that. Yeah. So that's,
I guess like that's a huge aspect of gravel that I absolutely love. I like finding new gravel and new places to ride. I get sort of stale very quickly.
Sure.
Just riding the same stuff all the time. So that's why I do a lot of events. But I also spend a lot of time on my computer searching out gravel roads, bringing up Google Maps, hitting the street level, then going to ride to actually see what it's like out there. I spent years and years sort of doing that and finding out. Did have sort of, we'll call him a mentor, Jim Grimley, basically the Godfather, as I sort of jokingly, Mr. Spicy. He inspired me a lot to sort of get out and search and find stuff. And, he pointed me in a lot of good directions. And then I sort of just jumped and sort of fell into that. And I always see it as almost like a hobby. And so putting together events where you see the joy and suffering on other people, and then after the fact, even if I'm not riding, like that day that you saw me, I wasn't riding, but it's the camaraderie.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, that's sort of the spirit of gravel.
Absolutely.
Like when you pass by a fellow rider who's on the side of the road, you're saying, do you need something? What's going on? You actually stop instead of blazing by, or like on your way past, you're going, you all good?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Saying it, but not really meaning it. And
hoping that the person says yes.
Yes, right. And I see a lot of that, and I'm not really interested in that. Gravel has become very race orientated.
It has.
There's a definitely pointy end to the head of the pack. Even though it may not be classified as a race. You get two cyclists out there, they're racing.
100%.
You know what I'm saying?
100%. The first time I went to Farmer's Daughter, they were very clear that it wasn't a race. And then there was a picture of people standing on a picnic table, like as a makeshift podium. You know? And it does, because it does get competitive. And I think being competitive isn't the worst thing in the world.
No.
But when you do want to have all different types of people, that's what I think is good about these events that offer these different courses. Even if we talk about Tour de Rhody, a Rhode Island event that we've mentioned before on the show, that you and I have both ridden together. It's cool that they, not only are you allowed to ride on these gravel roads, but then they'll also do like a 14-mile family loop. Same thing with D2R2. They do like this Green River Tour loop. So you really get all different types of people, different shapes and sizes. And it's not just aero suits,
Right. Sure.
speed suit, hammer fest, nose down, which like is fine for some people, but as long as you're not like ruining the mood for everyone. Or,
for me, there's also a drawback to that. If you sort of become too inclusive in regards to the number of loops that you're catering to, you sort of lose the community aspect, because it's, I'll steal this from, Peter, who basically started the Vermont Overland, sort of one loop, one ride for everybody.
And it's a shared experience.
It's a shared experience.
Yeah,
and I really agree there's something to that. Yep. When everybody gets back, they get done. Everybody's sharing that same experience.
Remember that hill?
Right.
Remember that view?
Exactly.
Yes.
Right. And when you have too many loops, it becomes, you sort of lose that aspect.
Totally agree.
Slightly.
Yeah, totally.
It only becomes with the people you rode with. Right. So like that may be 10 people or 5 people or 2 people. Right. Instead of meeting other people after the fact who all had that same experience.
Yeah, you're right. Because you can get to the end of an event and be like, did you do the metric? Did you do the metric? You know what I mean? There is like there's a solidarity to it. Right.
And a lot of gravel events early on were all like that. There was always just one sort of loop. Farmer's Daughter started out, and then they added sort of the granddaughter, the shorter loop and stuff like that. Yeah. I don't know about the Ranger, but when I did it, there was actually just 2 loops. I think initially, maybe when it started out, it was just one. It might have
just been one. Yeah.
And at that time, there was always marking the course, and now we moved away from that, and everything's, GPX file, and, for, sabotage, people getting out there, flipping arrows, and all that other pulling moving arrows. Signs. Kind of thing.
Yeah, so. I know that's happened before a couple times when I did mixtape, which I think we're also both doing together this year.
Yeah, done that.
They pull signs.
Yeah.
People pull signs because, the mixtape, they make like fun signs.
Oh, yeah.
It was like Back to the Future theme one year, you know what I mean? So people will take them for souvenirs, or you just get someone that might not be the biggest fan of cyclists and they want to move signs around and stuff. It is interesting because in the recent episode of the podcast, when I was sitting down with Brian, we were talking about the inclusivity of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that you want to have this one hard route to like make sure people don't come. Right. But it is. It's more about the solidarity or the camaraderie of like we all did the same thing. It's not like it's not for you. Right. It's like, no, anyone can do it. Right. And it might be a longer day for some people or an easier day for some people or whatever it is, right?
And I always think, to me, like I like underbiking, gravel biking to an extent. Yep. I think there's sort of a fine line where if you go too much, it doesn't become necessarily enjoyable. Some people may like that, but straight up underbiking all the time, I don't find 100% enjoyable. Yeah. I think it needs to sort of be sprinkled in. But you want to make loops or events hard enough that it challenges the majority of the riders. Because I think most riders who aren't at the pointy end are looking to sort of push themselves to some extent. Right. That's why, I sign up for events.
Yeah, sure.
And I want that ability to sometimes know I might not complete this thing.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I mean? That.
Or get to that cracking point where it's like, you have the mental games in your head going, man, I'm suffering right now and I'm going dark. Right. Like, I think the people that do the longer events know what I mean by that.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
When you get to sort of that 40, 50, everything starts going dark. Yeah. And you sort of have to turn off the mind, let the body do what it is, and sort of dig yourself out of that hole until you sort of like, hit mile 80 and you're like, oh man, I'm feeling good again. Exactly. Kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that probably happens to even the most experienced of riders, right?
I'm
because
sure.
And especially if it's an event that you haven't done before, so it's like new terrain, you're not like, because you could go out and do the same loop in your backyard and still ride hard, but know very much like when the end is coming. Right. But even on your head unit with an event like D2R2, that's like 110 kilometers or something, right? It's man, I got 2 more hours out here. Like I am suffering, but you got to just, and
that big climb on D2R2, I forgot where it comes, like mile 80, between 80 and 90, and people spend the previous 30 miles talking about, man, this climb's coming up.
You're talking about it at lunch. People are talking, but that's part of the spirit, I think. Like, that's the actual what we're talking about. Yeah, it's like...
And that's the whole mystique, I think, of some events. You know what I mean? That sort of has that build up, and you just can't wait to show up and go, kind of thing.
Now, you talk about underbiking a little bit. You mentioned coming from a mountain biking background, but getting more into gravel.
Right.
Gravel's probably the predominant type of riding these days, right?
I pretty much do all gravel now.
Yeah.
I'll sprinkle in once in a blue moon. I'll jump on the mountain bike, but pretty much I just ride gravel all the time.
What about road riding? Doesn't interest you? Do it very little.
When I started working at the shop, the very first season I bought a road bike, which was my first road bike ever. I've always sort of been leery on the road, not of my skills, of just other people pulling out, being on cell phones and stuff like that. And also riding in sort of a Peloton group, a big group on the road, requires a lot of trust of people
100%
you don't normally ride with.
Oh, yeah.
Where on gravel, it's sort of like that, but you can sort of create more space, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
And
you're not so confined by like the white line on the right-hand side of the road.
And I think when you're riding out in gravel, even though the surface may be changing and you have to get used to sort of drifting and sliding the bike underneath you on the loose over hard stuff, something about the road, I just always sort of, I wouldn't say intimidated me, but just sort of made me nervous slightly.
Well, you're right. There are more more variables that come down to other people. Right. And that's the thing. Right. Like, as much as I ride on the road, sometimes, I'm like, every single car that's about to pull out onto the road, that I'm like clocking them, and I'm clocking them again, and I'm hoping that they make eye contact with me. Right. And on gravel, you're just seeing a lot less people. Right.
Yeah. But I've come to enjoy road riding. Yep. We sort of sprinkle that in. Sometimes we get stale on the gravel, and we'll ride the road, a couple of times throughout the month and stuff like that. JD picks amazing loops out in your neck of the woods. He knows that. He grew up in that area. So he sort of gets us off the beaten path.
Yeah, as long as you got on some of those back roads, it's very sort of similar to that, like, middle of nowhere Arcadia. It's still middle of nowhere. Right. It's just the roads happen to be paved. Right.
And, it's nice to be in a group, traveling fast, riding somebody's wheel and sort of getting pulled along, kind of thing like that.
I think the trusting people thing, for me, as someone that like hosts group rides a lot, I try to ride in the front for multiple reasons. Sometimes just like keep the pace right for the group, but other times it's because I don't need to be behind a wheel that I don't know. And as much as I like riding with people and I like people to come out to rides, there are certain wheels that like I don't want to be behind. Right. And hopefully there can be maybe a sharing of knowledge at the end of the ride. Like, hey, remember when you did this or whatever, like just to keep people on the same page, because something as simple as like standing up could throw off your cadence, could throw off your pacing. And if someone is riding too close behind you, a little bit of a kiss of a wheel. And that is like, it's just, there's so many more, I think, times that might happen when it comes to riding on the road. Right.
Yeah, see, I don't host, the rides that we do on pavement, I don't really host or whatever. It's sort of just a core of us or whatever. But when I host a lot of my gravel rides during the summertime and riding weather, we usually do 3 a week. Tuesday night, Thursday night, and then we do a longer one on Sunday mornings. When I host those, I'm a guy who will call things out. Like, I'm very vocal on those rides because I don't know everybody's service. So like when we're coming into loose over hard and stuff like that, or if, we're sort of pace lining on the gravel and stuff like that, and potholes are coming up. These are all the things that you sort of need to call out, probably just like on the road.
Oh yeah, all the time.
So it's sort of being, and you're always watching out for everybody. Where everybody's at, kind of thing.
But it becomes like, sometimes it becomes like too much. That like riding by yourself or riding with like 3 buddies. It's almost, there's nothing better than that.
I was also,
you know how each other rides. Like you know what to expect. It's like another level of that anticipation. So like,
because when I was doing my single speed, when I really got into it for like a solid 4 years, a lot of my rides were solo all the time. And on single speeding, because I still own a gravel bike, single speed, which is brutally suffering sometimes.
I'm sure.
That's
especially if you're trying to keep up with a group or something.
Yeah, that's that belt drive, that 5022.
Yeah, sweet bike. It's a Ritchie, is that right?
And I put flat bars on it, and it's so it's just on a single speed, you're either preferred to be off the front or off the back.
Yeah.
Because it's always about carrying momentum. So if you're sort of mid-pack, people are stalling you out because they're on gears and they're just dumping, where I'm looking to carry as much momentum as I can. So it's on single speeds, it's one of those, you're in one of those two areas, unless everybody's on the single speed.
Yeah, right. You're all right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
So we touched a little bit on gravel bikes.
Yeah.
I think that they're interesting because they're, relatively new. I just feel like the technology behind them is changing a lot faster than it does, let's say, in the mountain bike world or in the road bike world, right?
Right.
And this is something that we've talked about a couple times before. So I recently bought a pair of drop bars for my gravel bike.
Yeah.
And while we were looking at them, I think you said I would just cut the drops off of my bar.
Yeah.
So you don't really ride in the drops that much. Is that right?
No, and I'm not a big rider. I don't really like the flare.
You don't like the flare.
Yeah,
right.
so, basically the bar is one length on the top, and then the sides, where the drops are, those flare out to whatever degree.
I know. There might be some cow chippers in this room.
Yeah. We
flare out quite a bit.
We do.
Yeah.
And I never really cared for the flare, especially if it's, really exaggerated.
Yeah. Why is that? You just doesn't feel comfortable? Doesn't feel stable?
Yeah, I don't feel stable in the drops, really.
Yeah.
Basically, if I'm looking to stretch out my back, maybe I'll go in the drops and sort of stretch it out a little bit. But 90% of the time, I'm sitting on the hoods. I feel much more locked in, especially when we get down into sort of the underbiking, bony, sort of chunky stuff going downhill. A lot of people will get in their drops. For some reason, I get into the hoods. I feel sort of locked in.
Yeah.
And I just can be, everything is sort of at my fingertips.
Right.
But then there's other people, it's just because I know you had some, a lot of people will go with the dropper seat post. And they'll go with suspension.
So you never had a dropper on a mountain bike, did you?
No.
No.
And I have, I don't really like a dropper on a mountain bike.
Yeah. And you don't run one on your gravel bike?
No.
No. I mean, I don't run one on my gravel bike either. But I do think that there are probably a lot of people that come from mountain biking who are used to a dropper on a mountain bike that go into gravel and they want to use a dropper on their gravel bike.
Yeah.
And for some people that might be fine.
Yeah.
But for you, not interested.
No. I mean, because starting when you were using cross bikes, nobody was doing that.
Right.
And so it was probably more for me just how I was brought in and the time frame I came into sort of riding gravel, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I always preferred full rigid,
Yeah.
like so to speak. No, all the comfort came from dialing your tire pressure.
Gotcha. Right.
And
right, because there are a lot of new things.
Yeah.
As much as we're going wider tires and lower PSI, there are those stems that have a little bit of something in them. There's like those seat posts that got a little bit, right? There's even like the chain stay.
Yeah.
Like there's that Cannondale that has like
Niner has one. Has a bike out.
What about like the front fork on those Laufs?
Yeah.
That like leaf spring.
Right.
So for the most part, you're steering away from those for your own personal riding, and you're just trying to tires are important to you.
Yeah, I think, coming from that sort of background of cyclocross bike and that in cyclocross, it's all about sort of the tire tread and the tire pressure.
Right.
And so I just carried that over. Maybe I'm missing something out. Like I've never ridden on a full squish. I'm just, even when I ride a mountain bike, I'd rather be on either a full rigid single speed or give me a front fork. But
Gotcha.
I own a full suspension bike, and it sits in my house, and basically it collects dust.
Yeah, right.
And I really should just sell it, but...
but you like the feeling of a rigid bike.
I do.
Yeah.
I like the ability to throw it around, how nimble it is for me, especially on the single speed, getting up and over things. I find it much easier because it's just so much lighter.
Yeah. Now, what about road bike wise? I know you don't ride the road bike as much, but do you gravitate to more of a stiff aero bike as opposed to like a climbing bike?
No, I actually have a Damani SLR, which I like.
Yeah.
It's got that, the ISO speed coupler in the back. So it's just enough cushion to sort of give me that.
Right.
My last gravel bike that I was riding from the shop was the Checkpoint.
Yeah.
The SL7 Checkpoint 2x. When I first got on that thing, I thought it was broken. Between the carbon post, the saddle was so much give, and then the ISO speed, I literally thought the first couple of rides, something's broken here because it was giving so much.
Because it feels different.
Yeah.
I remember one of the first times I brought my Cervelo R5 in here, and they, it was tuned up for some reason. You handed it back to me, and you were like, "Man, that seat post has a lot of," and it does.
Right.
It's made like that.
Right.
And I have a big drop between my saddle and my stem.
Yeah.
So my seat post is kind of high up, which makes for more give.
Right.
And there's a good amount of flex there.
Sure.
And the bike in general, being a climbing bike, is a little bit more noodly than like a stiff bike.
Yeah.
But I've gotten on, I think maybe the first time I got on like 30s at like 55 PSI.
Right.
The whole ride, I'm going flat.
Yeah.
I'm going flat. Something's wrong. There's a problem. But it takes a little bit of getting used to. Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you and I, it's funny because you and I are both on polar opposites. You prefer to ride a smaller bike.
Correct.
And I'm on the opposite where I prefer to ride a slightly larger
I think
bike.
there's an inch difference between us in our height.
Yeah.
You ride a 58 and I ride a 54.
Exactly.
And we could both be riding 56s. No problem.
Right.
Yeah. Most people might be riding 56s at our height, our size.
Exactly. Yeah. With our inseam and everything.
Yeah.
It's just, I always preferred a slightly bigger bike underneath me for whatever.
I think that's why, as much as it is nice to have size charts, whether it be for kit or for bikes or anything like that, really nothing is better than trying it out or getting a bike fit. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, you really got to know what works for you, because someone might want to ride a 58 with a slightly shorter stem.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or vice versa.
Right. Because basically your riding style really dictates on sort of where you want to be size-wise. Yeah. Because, I mean, people come to the shop all the time, and I can tell you, based on your inseam, what bike you should. I don't really go by height per se.
Yeah, but you go inseam.
I go inseam.
Yeah.
Just for the fact that that's always holds true, because two people can be the same height, but one comes from the torso up and the other one's from the torso
exactly.
down.
So your standover height is different.
Exactly.
And that's really when we're talking about like the size of a bike. Right. We're talking about like the stack.
Exactly.
And the standover height.
Yeah. And so it's like, find your inseam, see where it is, get you on that bike, and like see how you like the feel of that.
Right.
Does it feel okay? Do you prefer something slightly smaller, more nimble? Or do you want to do sort of a point and shoot? You want a sort of a bigger bike underneath you, sort of kind of thing. And what do you think? Do you think it's like the stability of it? It's just the way it holds your center of gravity? Like, what is it about a 56 that you don't care for? Could you say? I mean, definitely when I ride the 58, being a bigger bike, it's a much more solid platform underneath me. If I was doing a lot of underbiking on off the bike kind of stuff like that, then I might go to like a 56, have a longer, seat post.
But then it's easier to get on and off of it as it's slightly smaller.
Exactly. And I always sort of just gravitated to slightly the bigger bike kind of thing. Just something about the way it feels, especially when I'm bombing down sort of real bony, chunky stuff or whatever. It's hard to sort of get knocked off your line that you're sort of choosing to hit.
Another thing that we sort of talked about real quick, that we talked about before, that I just like the ability to find gravel and loop it together. Yeah. And I think as someone, we both grew up in Rhode Island. It's a small state. Right. You think you know. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, the corners, Providence is here, Westerly's here, Narragansett's there. Yeah. But once you get on a bike and you really get to explore these roads that like you would never drive your car on unless you knew someone that lived down by Stepping Stone Falls. Right. Why the hell would you go on Falls River Road? Right, exactly. But then you find that on the bike and you realize that you're like, okay, there's this pocket of gravel over by what we call the Capitol, like by Green. Yeah. And then there's all this other gravel down by Arcadia, which has tons of mountain bike trails, but all the fire roads, all the access roads in there are gorgeous. Yeah. And then slightly north of that is like the reservoir adjacent Foster into Connecticut a little bit, kind of like Thompson, almost like Natchog area, right? Yeah. And then there's Natchog up there, but then there's Patchogue down by Voluntown. And the ability to like loop them all together, you sort of, if you were to look at them on the map, they would seem like 4 distinct areas. Right. But if there's 5 miles of pavement in between, that's not that bad. Yeah. It's like a nice, sometimes a little bit of pavement is a nice reprieve.
Yeah. Basically for me, when I look at creating some type of a loop or whatever, and I'm looking to sort of join areas together. Yeah. I use the pavement as recovery zones. Yeah. It's a great way
where
you're sort of getting relief.
Right.
You can sort of shake out. You can grab your bottle. You can have a gel, whatever snack you sort of brought. You talk a little bit. And then when you hit the gravel or whatever, you know, it gets a little chunkier, especially around here, especially down in Patchogue. We call it the Patchogue chunk. You know, it sort of requires, you know, sort of more
different
focus.
Type of focus.
Exactly.
And I find myself constantly forgetting to drink when I ride gravel. Like, I think I'm pretty damn good at that, like knowing my hydration strategy, my fueling strategy. Gravel, I have to think about it so much more. Because there might be 10 minutes of focus. Hands on the bars. I'm not taking my hands off the bars if I'm going up or if I'm going down. You know what I mean? And like, I like that challenge. I like the, I think that's why I like cycling so much is I think when I'm not on the bike, my brain is thinking about a million things. You know? Like I have undiagnosed adult ADHD, right? So I'm just like all over the place. When I'm on the bike, even if I'm listening to music or not, it's still very much like I get to focus. And everything else gets sort of blocked out. But sometimes it's too much and you're like, ah, shit, I didn't grab my bottles or whatever. And I think that knowing that happens and being able to anticipate it, because if you're doing like a long gravel loop, it's like 60 miles, you're going to be out there for 4+ hours. Because you're not going, it's not like the same as road speeds. Not around here, at least, you know? Maybe 15 miles per hour. If you're lucky.
That's pretty much average. Around like solid. 15 and a half. If you're really moving along and you're working together, you can get like 16 or whatever. It's funny that you mentioned music. I almost never ride.
Don't listen to
I never ride with music. Maybe once in a while on the road I do. And I have those like ear, you know, those jawbone sort of things that you can think. But when I ride gravel, I use it and I try to basically shut my mind down and just sort of like, I wouldn't say be quiet, but just not think about anything.
I think that's...
And then as things come in, I see if I can sort of dismiss them. And I think that adds to the whole suffering aspect and going dark and sort of shutting down the mind and just letting the body, you know, do what it's going to do and sort of enjoy the experience or the...
Living in the moment.
Exactly.
I think that we have such a hard time living in the moment, right? Whether it's because of our phone or you know, just like everything moves so fast that like that ability to just be like present and focus is therapeutic. I've sort of argued, a lot of people are like, bike is therapy. I think therapy is important. Real therapy is important. If you need real therapy, you should talk to someone.
Definitely.
But riding your bike is very therapeutic in that way.
Big
and
time.
That can like, and I think that like presentness of riding your bike is more than my fitness. It's the mental health fitness about it that is like so important for me, at least, you know, like as someone that also has like struggled with their weight in the past or struggled with motivation in the past, just like that ability to like, nope, I'm here. I'm on the bike. I'm here. And I listen to music a lot less when I'm on gravel, just because I do feel like it allows me to focus in a different way, you know, but it's funny that like, I listen to music almost, I mean, every single solo ride. I bought those shocks because they last for like 7 hours. And I can just ride with them all the time. If I'm riding with a group, I try to be friendly. You know, and like talk and like turn the music off. But I know that we both really enjoy music. It's just funny that you don't care to listen to it. You almost, do you think it's like too much of a distraction? Do you think it takes you out of that presentness?
I think I just enjoyed the solitude slightly more, especially if I'm on a ride by myself. A lot of times I just enjoy sort of being quiet and I'm not talking to anybody. I'm not listening to anybody. I'm almost seeing like where my mind goes. If it's sort of, I mean, it may sound hokey, but I just sort of take comfort in that a lot of the times. And that's why I always sort of gravitated to the longer rides. Because at some point in the ride, all you can think about is like, I want off this bike. Like I don't want to do this anymore. And your mind will go, so what I call dark. And you sort of go to all these sort of weird places. And then I think when you come out the other side and if you can shut that down and just pedal, you get this huge sort of...
Oh, it's empowering.
Like,
it is. It's empowering.
It really is.
Yeah. I agree.
Something about that I always liked.
Yeah, I love like not having music on, being in the middle of the woods, but then like stopping, whether it's for a nature break or just because I want to take a break, take a picture or something, and how quiet it is. You know, like it is amazingly quiet at some of those places out there. In the middle of the woods. It's just like really nice, you know, like maybe you just hear some birds, you just hear some trees. And like, even though I live in a very like rural area, it's nice to be in the middle, essentially in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Connecticut, somewhere in Rhode Island, and just be like, wow, there's not many people around here. It's really quiet, and you don't really get that much. You know.
The old philosophical question, you know, if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a noise?
If a rider bumps in the woods and no one is around to hear it, do they still suffer? Well, that's about it, JB.
Great.
Is there anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
No, I do appreciate you, even though I was reluctant to do this, John. I appreciate you coming on down and interviewing me. So,
well, thank you. Thanks for doing it. Shout out to NBX. We are here, the official bike shop of It's Just a Hill. And yeah, JB, thanks so much. You've been so helpful to It's Just a Hill since the beginning. You've been a person that I confide in, person that I talk with privately about things that I like about the club, things that frustrate me about the club. And so, yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks, John.
All right, man. Take care.
We are It's Just a Hill, a cycling club that promotes inclusion, judgment-free, with no gatekeepers. Focused on creating content from behind the handlebars to in the studio, It's Just a Hill is producing videos and podcasts to spread the message that cycling is for everyone. We are focused on reminding everyone that riding your bike can help you overcome any obstacle, because after all, it's just a hill.
Decaf left, regular right. Decaf left, regular right. It's very challenging work.